Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting conversation with Giuseppe Colucci. And Giuseppe, we're going to talk today about reinventing growth. And you're the Chief Growth Officer at Textbroker International. And you've worked both on the agency side, you've worked on the MarTech side, the tech side, inside of companies like you're doing right now. We're going to talk about reinventing growth after AI disruption. And what's interesting about that is that your point of view is not all about the bright, shiny object. How do we take AI and use that, only that as a platform for growth, right? But how we have to also ground ourselves in some of the fundamentals and a reminder of what those fundamentals are and how that all comes together. So I'm super excited about what we're going to talk about here today. You also have a very international perspective. You were born in Italy. You've spent, I think, the last 15 years in Germany, traveled over 50 different countries internationally. You do business in the US and in Europe. I'd love to just know a little bit more about you and your background before we dive in and get started here.
All right, sounds good. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Steve, for having me. It's my pleasure. I'm actually really genuinely happy to be here with you today. And I hope I can share a little bit of my direct experience on the fields and on the topics we are going to discuss, which maybe help a professional like us to put certain things in perspective. Yeah, so my name is Giuseppe. I'm living in Germany, as you say, for already 15 years. I'm working in the growth and the business development side of things for 13 of these 15 years. I've been working in multiple agencies, marketing software companies, and I've devoted myself to different areas of marketing. I started with content marketing, learned SEO, then evolved into digital PR, influencer marketing, social media marketing. And now I'm obviously very keen on learning also how the AI search world works and trying to apply these learnings.
Well, I'm going to start with kind of the big question, right? The idea of AI and the revolution, the disruption, however you call it, a lot of legacy, you might say, business models, they don't work anymore, right? This disruption aspect of it, like a proven model that we had and we knew and we trusted, and all of a sudden it gets all tossed up in the air. We got to rethink everything. Tell me a little bit about kind of how you see the AI just disrupting and changing the industry, good and bad. And let's just start there.
I mean, AI is around for many more years than people think, right? But officially, if one could put a date as for this storm to start, it started in December 2022 when ChatGPT came to the market, and all of a sudden everything seemed to change, right? We actually, as content business, my company originally is a content business. So we worked for 20 years as a marketplace for content creators, human content creators. We were the first ones disrupted. So when I came, GPT came to the market, human content creation was one of the very first disrupted businesses. So as you can imagine, for us, we questioned our business model. Our business model was actually questioned by the market. And after that, in the following three and a half years now, many business models have been challenged. Many professions have been challenged. I think what we can say is that definitely certain professions are not going to be relevant anymore in the future, as well as some business models. Yeah, many speak about, for instance, the affiliate model is no longer is not going to survive the AI. But yeah, I guess the logic that brands and service providers will need to follow in this new world is just different, and one needs to adapt as early as they can, learn how this works, and try to apply the changes. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've had some really, I would say, in-depth conversation on the podcast here about how when AI is disrupting, two things are happening that we don't talk a lot about. First is the expectation for value that we provide as a business to our clientele has escalated dramatically, and the time frame that we deliver it has decreased dramatically. Right? What we expect and how we deliver it and how fast we deliver it dramatically changes, right? At the same time, the buyers are more wary than ever. They know that everything's being disrupted. They know everything's changing in front of them. They're less apt to make longer term commitments, right? So with kind of things happening on both ends, what does that mean for us as B2B selling organizations, right? Where expectations are increasing, but commitments are harder to get.
Yeah, well, obviously that's the case, right? It's one of the, let's say, main reasons why companies, businesses decide to adopt AI within, to make their processes more efficient, effective, fast, is exactly that, right? That they can gain efficiency. But for a service provider, obviously, either they have the, let's say, AI elements already as a part of their process or of their value proposition, or if they don't, then they need to make sure they kind of include it, because that's what companies expect. Same time, I can say that in our experience, companies that earlier were more open to give like long-term commitments, because they knew that to kind of like steer strategy, like a strategic approach to whatever service or topic we would cover, it would take time, right? So SEO is one of the fields where everyone knows it takes time, right? You cannot see results, or you cannot calculate return on investment overnight. At the same time, that time now is shrinking, both because obviously the entire concept of AI wants to make things faster, but also because with all the old world of search changing so drastically, right? Imagine before, companies and the service providers were used to optimize mainly for one channel, which was Google. And now that they need to optimize for multiple channels, and these channels obviously work very differently. They work on very different logic. The interaction between users and the channel is very different, right? And therefore, also the access to the data that they can use to take decisions is changing drastically. And they know that things are changing very fast, and they can no longer trust. So, there are a number of legacy tools that companies used to use to track their performance. And then there are a few new generation tools, like companies that at the moment are very trendy, very hyped, receiving great funding to kind of guide brands in this new world. But the fundamental, let's say, source of like the data that they are supposed to rely on, it's very much of a work in progress now, right? It's not fully reliable, and that's why it is really difficult for companies to trust this data, and therefore to take long-term decisions. Things are changing fast, and so also for them it's more on a try and fail and then optimize kind of process, right?
I love so much what you just said there. One of the things that I really want to kind of drill down on a bit is we don't forget, but content is the foundation for ABM go to market, right? And that's every executive that's on this podcast this is an ABM B2B go to market podcast, right? And so, like Forrester, they came out years ago and they're like, content is the foundation, right? It's the thought leadership, it's the third party perspectives that you're bringing in that reinforce and validate your go to market strategy. It is our face out in the world, and why people want to know us, trust us, and then do business with us afterwards. And so you talked about, in this world, we have to be able to adapt, right? The adaptability is a part of, it's like a strategic goal, right? That we have to have these days. How does that apply to this content foundation? How do we have to be adaptable in a market where content is our best foot forward in many, many ways? As a content company, right? How are you thinking about adapting and where the market's going so that we can learn from that?
I guess we could talk about this for hours. Um, there are different applications of like the different ways to answer your question. Let me start by saying that I used to run sales departments in the past, trying to sell software or agency services with an outbound approach. That kind of that kind of approach focused on a little more of a transactional kind of interaction is something that's no longer works. Yeah, no longer works in my experience for the type of businesses I'm used to run. Whereas the content element actually is exactly what companies and brands should try to leverage to build in order to, first of all, build credibility and trust and thought leadership, as you say, for themselves, but also to try, and this is in particular relevant for companies applying an ABM model, trying to apply their experience, their learnings to the actual customer case of their target audience, of their ICP, right? Trying to think always from the perspective of no one cares about what I'm doing. Everyone cares about how what I do can benefit them specifically. Their specific, the specific type of business they are, the specific phase of their business journey they are in, and that specific persona eventually. So I guess that is the foundation of how a company needs to kind of like leverage contents to reinforce the brand. And now the topic of reinforcing the brand is more relevant than ever, right? Because we've been talking earlier about the AI search experience in comparison to the legacy traditional Google experience. Brands are now, let's say, the driving force, right? Are the driving force for themselves. Is no longer creating content that can just enable them to rank for certain keywords or certain topics, but they need to create an entity that enables their brand to be visible and then found and then mentioned and then cited exactly for obviously the type of service and products they want to offer to the market, but also based on the let's say areas they want to position themselves in. Yeah, for example, if you are, I don't know, I'm just making an example. If you are like a luxury brand, you don't want people to find when they're looking for cheap options in your industry, right? You want quite the opposite. And that's exactly how companies should now build content strategies to put the brands at the core of it. Yeah. And obviously this includes every aspect that covers their own page or kind of their own corporate communication on their own channels. But now in this new AI search words, what matters even more is the so-called off-page channels, trying to influence, manipulate how users and people talk about you. That's the real currency now. That's what companies need to build a coherent strategy for.
Okay, so you just opened a big can of worms there. It's always been important, right? Always been important that we get outside validation, we get others talking about us. It just can't be us out there talking about ourselves. And in fact, you can go just to the recent Edelman Trust Barometer that measures trust all over the world, 32,000 respondents. And 68% of those respondents think that guys like you and I, business leaders, are intentionally misleading. Intentionally misleading. 68%, right? So over 2/3. So right then and there, you got to say, okay, we can't be the only spokesperson for ourselves. We are the least trusted of all the voices in the market, right? And so it's always been important, but the trust gap, the deficit, the epidemic that we're talking about means we need those outside validation voices more than ever. And then you gave a second reason, which is it's vitally important to come up like in the LLMs, like ask engine optimization these days. We have to have others that are talking about us. We need valid the LLMs and SEO too, right? It's shining a spotlight on the fundamentals of that we have to have evidence from outside ourselves, our own companies, that validate what we do and why it's important. And how is that? I'm going to put you on the spot on a scale of 1 to 10, that outside validation, and it can come through in our content, but independent content as well. How important, as a chief growth officer of a B2B ABM company, right? How important is that outside validation?
It's hard to give a specific number, but I'll try. Okay. I guess in the traditional world, one could measure on-page versus off-page strategies having an impact of 60-40, right? One is focus on their own channels a little bit more than the external channels, but obviously in a more balanced kind of ratio. Now it looks like this balance is shifting towards off-page, and maybe it's becoming some sort of like 30-70 or even 20-80. And that is the mechanism of the retrieval mechanism of the LLMs actually give more importance to the external sources, the external trusted sources. So if you are a massive brand, a brand that everyone trusts as the thought leader for a specific industry, for a specific topic, you may end up being the most trusted source for LLMs, right? Because you are the person. But if you're not, and for the vast majority of businesses, this is the case, other sources are more trusted than you. Other people with more authority, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness are more trusted than you. And other channels, like obviously the big elephant in the room is Reddit, right? Other channels where people have asked for recommendations and let's say interact in trusted environments of specialists or people with a certain know-how in a certain topic. Those channels for LLMs are extremely relevant to understand who you are, to judge how trustworthy you are, and to eventually recommend you or not, right? That's why businesses need to kind of impact, they need to be part of those conversations, first of all. They need to have them on their radar. They need to understand how users speak about them. They need to try to establish strategies that enable them to kind of enter those conversations and kind of impact them. Yeah. Brand sentiment is the keyword here. Yeah. And so visibility is not enough. One needs to also be very careful on understanding how their brand is perceived, what is the sentiment towards their brand out there, and obviously work towards making it better.
So here's part of what I'm taking away, right? It used to be SEO, and this is a very big generalization, but it used to be the more authority, right? The bigger companies with authority that can have backlinks coming to your website, huge, right? And what you're talking with like the Reddits of the world and everything is that individual conversations with peers in the community of who you're selling to, those individual conversations are really important, right? And so it's not like what I want to do is have you get your opinion on this. It's not like we just have to get those huge, big organizations to talk about us. We kind of need to just put ourselves into the middle of the conversation that's happening in our industry. And so how do you see that? Is like that a good takeaway from what you're saying here, or am I not getting that quite right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good summary, right? Let's say Reddit is a perfect example of this, but is not the only example. Reddit exists for over 15 years, but only in the last couple of years, like this huge funnel of being on Reddit started for brands. And that's for mainly two simple reasons. The first one is that Reddit cuts a very important deal with OpenAI. So all of the Reddit data is kind of like feeding the algorithms of OpenAI, and therefore it became one of the most citable sources. But it also became one of the most citable sources because of the structure, right? So imagine, first of all, Reddit is a platform where people ask questions and expect answers. How do you interact with with the LLMs, right? So with the AI system you use, usually you ask questions to receive answers. So it kind of like follow a similar, almost like semantic pattern, right? Secondly, Reddit is made of a number of sometimes extremely large, sometimes very, very niche subreddits of people interested or experts of a certain topic. So if I need a piece of advice, a recommendation on that topic, I know that if I go into that subreddit, there may be someone experienced enough to kind of guide me through it, right? Guide me through whatever, a purchase decision or any other type of decision, right? And that's the type of authority that LLMs recognize, when someone with a certain degree of expertise recommends your product or service, that's a good sign, right? That's a sign that maybe they, as LLMs, can recommend it too.
So I want to take this a step further, right? To insert yourself in the middle of the conversations with your ideal customer profile in the right places, you got to understand them. Like this puts a whole nother spotlight on understanding our customers because you've got to be perceived as a real authority. And it's not just our own published content anymore, right? It's in the middle of the conversations with them. And so we have to be perceived almost more as a peer, as a colleague than we ever have before. So having the conversations on an ongoing basis. And I had a 4-time B2B CRO on the podcast, and he said, Steve, it's not the sales conversations. He said, you got to get out and you got to talk to customers, right? You got to get outside of the sales environment and pressure and have real in-depth conversations with them. So that's a fundamental, right? We've always known that we need to do that, but there's just more gaining reasons why we really need to do that, even other than they're the North Star of our business anyways. Like we got to understand that no matter what, right? But everything that you're talking about really does shine a spotlight on if you don't understand your customer and your competitor does better, and that's reflected in the ongoing conversations that happen in the industry, you're going to lose strategically. You're going to lose from a competitive advantage. You're going to lose in ask engine optimization. You're going to lose in SEO. You're going to lose as in trust and your brand perception. I mean, let's just keep going on and on, right? Talk to me from a chief growth officer perspective, the importance of the voice of the customer, right? And really truly understanding that.
Well, you need to allow me a bit of a longer answer for that. Because there is a lot to say here. First of all, traditionally, I guess every sales organization or growth organization communicates themselves as customer-centric, but if you dig deep into it, probably only a small percentage of them really are customer-centric, right? Customer-centric means listening, not talking, but listening and understanding what your clients are looking for, what's the pain points, what's their perspective, what's their vision into what they are doing, that your product or service can be, let's say, a piece, like a piece of the puzzle to support them. And you need to be able to enable them to put that piece of the puzzle in their puzzle at the right time and at the right cost. So I mentioned before, I work for Textbroker it's a business that for 20 years has been market leader worldwide as a human content service provider, right? And we were some of the first ones to be disrupted by the ChatGPT and then the kind of like AI revolution. So when back then it happens, right? We kind of, I just joined the company, by the way, and we kind of looked at ourselves in the eyes and said, okay, so what do we do now? Do we consider our business dads? And if so, what do we do, right? So luckily for a few years prior, we had started to develop an agency layer on top of our standard kind of marketplace business model. But this agency layer was not perceived as the core of the business. The core of our business for us was this scalable marketplace model, right? Kind of like self-service model. Whereas the agency was just a way to maximize the type of support needed by certain more sophisticated, larger companies we would work with. When this happened in 2022, beginning 23, what we had to do was to understand how can we survive the storm, take the time, enabling us to buy time, and then take that time to reposition ourselves in the market. But the only way we could actually reposition ourselves in the market was by talking to our customers, right? Trying to understand what happened to those customers that prevented them from buying our disrupted services, and what would they need from us as a trusted business partner to kind of guide them through a moment of storm, which was a storm also for them, right? For us, obviously, because that was our business model, but in a way, it was a storm also for them, right? Many things have changed for them as well. And I guess just by talking to this customer profoundly, openly, and so on, we kind of understood that our way to go was to strengthen our agency model, our agency side of things, in order to provide them that anchor, also supporting them through this period, and then through this period also understand which direction was the industry taking. And obviously the industry has taken very, I wouldn't say clear directions, but let's say it's much clearer now than it was 2 or 3 years back. And then we had to decide how to reposition ourselves to kind of embrace that. Yeah, and so we obviously move into the direction of strengthening our geo AI search agency efforts, but trying to be true to ourselves, right? To kind of like capture something from our legacy business that could serve as a strength in our current business, without trying to be something we were not, or without trying to compete with others that were already doing that before, and it obviously had a competitive advantage. So I guess the synthesis of this was our secret, yeah? like the reason why we were able to reposition ourselves quite strongly. And then in parallel, obviously, because we were also used ourselves, our board, our investors, we were all used to, and a scalable business, we had to think of a way to bring back that scalability element. And that's why we also developed a new software as a service, which actually is positioned fully in the world of AI search, and that actually enables also brands to understand, track, and act better to influence positively their brand sentiment. But yeah, the topic of speaking to customers is relevant for different types of businesses now, because as I mentioned before, the data that the new AI visibility tools, for example, are using is data that is not as accurate as it could be, simply because these new platforms are not yet sharing this publicly as Google used to be, right? Used to do. Sometimes it's a lot of guessing, and taking important, heavy business decisions based on guessing is something that no one likes to do. So I think the safest way to actually understand better what to do is by talking directly to customers. And I'm seeing a lot of agencies, a lot of service providers doing that, and I think they're right. Whereas others don't do that, and I think they're wrong.
The market is with you. Actually, you talked at the beginning about how companies say that they're customer first, right? And customer focused. And Forrester did a big study in 2024, their customer obsession study. They found that of B2B companies, only 3% were customer obsessed. Only 3%. We're really good at laying our own path. Like, this is what we should do and getting everybody on board and just going for it, right? But what the story you just told there is the entire repositioning of your company was based fundamentally on the needs of the customer. If it didn't match, it wasn't a right repositioning, rebranding, rebirth of the company. It had to match that, right? So I would love to, we've talked about so much here, but I would love your opinion on, if for the executives that are consuming this podcast, if there was one thing that you wanted them to take away from our conversation here today. It could be something that we've already talked about. It could be something new. But if there was one thing that you wanted to communicate, what would that be?
Well, I could mention two things actually, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first one is a concept that I've already partly covered before, but I think it's becoming very central in the narration regarding AI search, and that's the concept of brand sentiment, right? I guess everyone now tries to be visible, but I think not everyone puts the right focus and attention on the way their brand is perceived. And I think that in the future, this will matter as much, at least, if not even more, the visibility per se. So when you are an executive and you wanna strengthen your position on AI systems, for instance, do not focus only on being visible for certain queries that you think your audience would ask to the LLMs, but try to build a sentiment for your brand, a perception for your brand that is exactly the way you want your brand to be perceived, right? You want people to talk also when you are not in the room about your brand. So I think this is a very important element that more and more brands will understand more and more in the future. And another thing is that, as leaders, as executives, we need to deal with teams, with employees, with the people we work with. They have a different perception than we have about the adoption of AI, right? I've also read a study on LinkedIn the other day from Growth Memo, which is also a newsletter in my area, in my field, that I really recommend to read, which shows that the AI adoption and the ability to work with AI in C-levels and like in leadership positions is impacting enormously more the income than it does for like more junior or entry level positions. So we need to understand that for them, this is not only exciting, but it can be also very scary. So I guess the best piece of advice we as leaders can give to our teams is become really the CEO of themselves, kind of not to passively let others kind of use AI to modify or to change their workflows and the way they work, but trying to become more knowledgeable about it and try to drive that change. Because I guess one thing that AI does is that it kind of like resets a little bit the skill set that is relevant to progress professionally. And I guess that's a good opportunity for them. And we as leaders, we need to see it and we need to encourage that.
Yeah, we all have the ability to be more proactive, learn, apply, and execute in ways that we never have, right? So I love it. I wish we had like another couple of hours to talk here, but the mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives from different industries and different C-suite executives that are all responsible as a C-suite executive, we are all responsible for growth overall of our business, right? And so that's the level of thinking we love to bring onto the podcast. And if we do that and we do it again and again and again, we can all learn from it. That's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much, Steve. It was a pleasure for me, really. I'm usually on the other side of the mic, but it was a great pleasure talking to you, and thanks for inviting me.